Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
A warmer for the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Ryan McIntyre. He does amazing work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're going to be chatting with him about what we're all seeing here in the offseason. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of these Big Ten teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on. That is a very fun and interesting conference as there's a few teams that he's starting to feel a little bit lukewarm on, a few teams that he's a little bit bearish on, a few teams that he's bullish on, and I think that this is worth talking about as well. And I've been doing it the last few days, and we're going to ask Ryan about this as well. The travel that we saw from the teams that were in the old Pac-12, that they entered into new power conferences like the Big 12, the Big 10, what have you, how the travel disproportionately affected the West Coast teams versus the East Coast teams, that is certainly going to be a talking point with Ryan. And with Ryan, he's just a wealth of information, so we're going to have a good chat with him. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is brought to you by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever 100% of gambling transactions do get approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, type in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with Ryan McIntyre, who does both great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He does that with our good friend Kobe Damp, but additionally, he also does an amazing job with the Ryan and Rush Show that is dedicated all to West Virginia athletics. When you go to the old Twitter/X, you're able to follow him at Moneyline_Mac, and it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Greg. Dog days of summer, or at least we got some TBT, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. And I've never been too much of a TBT guy personally, but you know what? We've got ourselves some baseball. That's a little bit more in my neck of the woods, so that has been making me happy that we finally have gotten past the All-Star break, so that's big. But how do you take a look at this time of year? Because a lot of teams, they do return to practice now, and now we get a little bit more of a feel of how these teams are going to be looking, and we start to get reports that some of these guys are starting to burst onto the scene, and some of these guys that might be, shall we say, the sleepers of the upcoming season.
I think that coaches will talk a little bit more this time of year because they've been able to watch their team practice now for 7-8 weeks. I think we're approaching 8 weeks of summer session. So guys will have a couple more practices here over the next couple weeks, and then they'll go home for their final fall break and then come back on campus and it'll be full go. So yeah, you start to look and keep your ears out for stuff leaking out because it's an exciting time of year.
Yep, it certainly is, and we can sort of get some breadcrumbs as to what we're going to be getting for the upcoming season, and I do think that that is so important this time of year as well, because we do have a lot of unknowns in this day and age in college basketball, and just when it comes to your evaluations this time of year, because it is still relatively sight unseen for a lot of these teams, how do you try to decipher which teams might be able to gel, which teams it just feels like might not be the world's greatest fit for them?
Great question. This time of year is more scheduling news, it feels like. They're starting to release some of those early season
our guy Rocco Miller.
Yeah, and I think also those are just very beneficial to finding your identity as a team, because with this portal and NIL area, it's a lot of guessing this time of year almost. I mean, you think you got an idea, but you never know how guys are going to mesh with one another from an identity standpoint, and just also when you pay the guys as much as they're paying them, everybody wants a piece of the pie. Everybody's promised something. I like identifying programs that have winning culture guys, whether even if they're coming up a level.
Yep, I do think so as well. And I think that that's something that is so interesting to be taking a look at. And I think that's something that is so difficult as well. Just how these guys are going to be moving up or down a level. And I would say the bigger roll of the dice is actually some of these guys that go down a level, because at the very least, when a guy averages like 15 points per game, and insert your favorite mid-major conference here, you know that they're able to score, and you know that they performed on the college level. And typically every mid-major has to step up a little bit in competition, whereas with some of these guys that maybe they're riding the pine after being a top 150, top 200 recruit, you just don't know if maybe the evaluators with them coming out of high school just whiffed on the guy.
Yeah, or maybe there was just a bad fit, bad circumstances. We saw Will Wade have much success at McNeese, kind of getting guys on their second chance U type opportunities. I saw Chris Jans when he was at New Mexico State really do well with those guys, and different mid-major programs that have just been able to do so, whether it was at the JUCO level or just fifth-year transfer level. So I agree with you, Greg. That is a tough one to evaluate, because you don't know exactly where their mindset is, because it's a little bit of a shot to the ego when you got to go down a level, but sometimes it's necessary.
Yep, it certainly is. And we've seen some of these guys just flop, but then sometimes you get someone like what we saw with Braden Podziemski when he went to Santa Clara. He was just absolutely tremendous for them. So we certainly have a little bit on both sides of things, as Ryan McIntyre, who does such good work over the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, he is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And when it comes to this time of year, a lot of people are talking about the teams that they're bullish on, the teams that they're feeling good about, but I want to take a little bit of a look at the other side of the coin, because this is not the time of year where a lot of people are like, I don't like this team. I'm feeling bearish about this team. But are there a few teams out there right now where you're maybe hearing a lot of hype about them and you're just not buying it right now?
Memphis is probably the one that kind of stands out the most. They lost a ton in the portal. They did get Doug McDaniel, but then they lost PJ Haggerty. They don't have the roster that they've had over the last couple of years. So I think they're going to take a minute to mesh it. And the American is turning into almost a one-bid league. So I'll be interested to see how they'll be able to mesh, or if they're able to be playing their best ball come conference tournament when they got to win 3 games in 3 days. And then other teams that I don't know if bearish is the right word, but teams like Kansas State, just so many question marks and so many new faces. And Jerome Tang, I think, in my opinion, is going to have his hands full this year, trying to mesh all those pieces.
Yeah, I do think so as well. And with Kansas State, it just feels like one of those teams, and I know that we've talked about it before, where it was a little bit of a one-hit wonder for them. They had that just incredible year where they make the Elite Eight, but as we know for Jerome Tang, he was able to luck into a few things as well, having just such a rock-solid, stable point guard like he was able to have. That's always going to be able to help you out as well. But I just take a look at Jerome Tang, and maybe things are winding down a little bit for him at Kansas State, because we know that the expectations are very high. There was a lot of money stuck into the roster last year. They didn't come through, and 2 years ago when they were able to bust through with Keontae Johnson, Marquise Noel, it just felt like that was a once-in-a-lifetime team for him to be able to acquire that on the fly.
It was. It kind of caught lightning in a bottle. Stars were aligned, and this is kind of the era, live by the portal, die by the portal. So we're seeing a lot of teams kind of boom or bust sometimes. I mean, we saw Missouri go up and down, and then they were back up last year. South Carolina has been very much boomerang, zigzag. So, yeah, it's tough. And when you're having to replace 10, 11 guys every year, you're going to whiff on a couple guys every now and then.
No question about it, and that's always very difficult to do. And I take a look at this as well, because I just recently did my Ivy League conference preview, and I think we could both agree. If there's one conference where we know that there's going to be some chemistry and there's going to be some returning minutes, it's the Ivy League, because they really don't have the luxury of the transfer portal. You saw Ben be able to get one guy, and that helps out when you're able to get a guy like a TJ Powers. So shout out to Fran McCaffrey and company, but the academic standards are so high, and let's call what it is. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but the money that it takes to get into an Ivy League school, that's very high as well. So there's that aspect of things. But I mean, how do you take a look at some of these teams that maybe they just stunk or Rooney the last year, but they've got a lot of returning minutes? Because a lot of people, they think, because they've got a lot of returning minutes that they're going to be much better. Yeah. But if the talent wasn't there to start with, sometimes that's a little bit of a confounding situation.
Completely agree, Greg. And it's a great question. I mean, you do want to get old and stay old in college basketball, but sometimes change is good. And sometimes I think guys get complacent in their second, third year, especially when they get paid. We've seen guys honestly regress from year to year after they get that big fat paycheck for the first time. So value returning minutes from winning teams or teams that finish the year strong and look like they were forming a strong identity down the stretch.
Yep, I agree with you there, as I do think that there is something to be taken a look at with regards to some of these teams with returning minutes, but at the same time, too, I think that's a situation-by-situation basis. I don't want to just bank on a team because they've got returning minutes. I need to see for myself that, hey, they were actually able to do a little bit of something, and they were able to have a little bit of improvement along the way. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I think that this is interesting as well. We're seeing more changing styles in college basketball than ever before. Like, I'm a man that is from the great state of Wisconsin, so obviously I cover the Wisconsin Badgers quite a bit. We know that that team was completely different last year from where they were in previous years. How do you take a look at a team like Wisconsin for this upcoming year as to whether or not they're going to be sticking with that slow control style that they had done every year prior to last year, or if they've now turned the corner and they are going to be adapting to what we saw more last year?
Great question. I mean, Greg Gard, it feels like he's kind of evolved over the times. And I think it started a couple of years ago when they had Johnny Jones. And I think that he played more to his strengths and they got rid of the swing offense and they got more modern. I think that Wisconsin will always still have somewhat of that identity of playing not completely fast, but they've been able to shoot the ball more from the perimeter. So a little bit of a mix and match from the old Wisconsin versus the new Wisconsin. And I think it's been good so far for them.
Yeah, it certainly was good for them last year. We'll see what they're going to be able to get this year, because when you lose a guy like a John Tonje, who was one of the better finds that we saw in all of college basketball last season, that's going to be hurting you just a skoch. But you know what? I'm feeling relatively bullish about this team as well, so we will be taking a look there. And I do think that the entire Big Ten is interesting, because I do feel like you've got a clear number one in Purdue, a clear number two in Michigan, and then just a log jam of different teams all around. And got a lot of teams that are probably going to be fighting for like 6 and 8 seeds in the NCAA tournament. I want to talk about this landscape of the Big Ten with Ryan McIntyre. Talk about how the travel in terms of these power conference teams that were in the Pac-12, how the West Coast teams were very much disproportionately affected in comparison to the East Coast teams, and just a few teams in general that are catching the attention of Ryan. We're going to talk about that next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast. We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by Ryan McIntyre. He does such amazing work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Follow him on the old Twitter /X at Moneyline_Mac for those that like West Virginia athletics as well. He also does a great job with the Ryan and Rush Show that is all dedicated to West Virginia. But right now we're talking about the Big Ten, and the Big Ten I find to be such a very fascinating conference to say the least. As we know in the Big Ten, I feel like there's a very defined top two. Purdue is that clear number one team. I feel like Michigan is that pretty clear number two, but then from there it becomes a little bit of a mismatch, and I want to get your thoughts as to how you're evaluating this conference, because I do think that this is going to be one of the toughest conferences to be able to evaluate once again, because year in and year out, you just have those teams that they're like between like a 6 to a 9 seed in the NCAA tournament, and it just feels like they crowd sort of those toss-up first-round games, for lack of a better term.
And there's a million teams in this league. The schedule really matters in this league because you're not going to play
no
everybody.
more 10 teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty much playing everybody just once, and hopefully you get the better end of the stick with the home court draw. So you're right. I think Purdue is definitely in the top class, and then Michigan would be the next team. I think Illinois should be talented once again, but they are such a portal-heavy team as well. So I'm interested to see how this new team meshes for Brad Underwood and his staff. I also think you can't ever count out Sparty with Izzo. I know they lost a lot, especially at the guard position, but I think they'll reload. They have an identity. Ohio State, they've been such an up-and-down team, especially under Diebler. And then teams like USC and Washington with second-year head coaches, can they make the jump? Mick Cronin and UCLA should be really good once again. I think they should be a top 25 team.
Yep, I think so as well. And I do think that it's going to be really interesting in terms of these conferences as well to see if the travel balances out from year number one to year number two as well. Because I feel like we saw this very much in that first year where these teams that came in from the Pac-12 into the Big 12, into the Big 10, and into the ACC, that was just very disproportionate to how much it affected the West Coast teams versus the East Coast teams. And my theory is because you're able to just sort of strategize when you have those 1 or 2 West Coast road trips. If you're out there in the Central time zone, if you're in the Eastern time zone, you can prepare for it much more than if you do it 5+ times in a year. How do you take a look at this aspect of things as well? Because I do think that that is something that is very crucial, and I'm going to be very curious to see if some of these teams that struggled on the road in year number 1 that were flying from west to east is able to figure it out a little bit more here in year 2.
Well, I also think maybe the league needs to do them more of a favor. Maybe they need to play 3-game road trips other end of the coast. So that would be UCLA, for example, going to play in Rutgers, Maryland, and Penn State, so they can knock out 3 games on one trip, kind of like they do in the NBA. Because having to do that, swing 4 to 5 times a year, that does take a toll on these guys. And we see it in football too. I mean, the teams going west have struggled going west, but in basketball, it seems to be the other way just because of the volume of the amount of times they have to do it throughout a 2-month span.
Yep, absolutely. I think that that's the biggest thing to it. If they were only having to do so like once or twice, I think that they'd be just fine. But clearly that is not the case for them. So that has been quite a bit of an issue, as we do have one of our good friends in Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And we've talked a lot about the Big 12 with you. We've talked quite a bit about the SEC, but I want to talk about this conference a little bit in the Big East, because it feels like there's sort of, shall we say, hiding in plain sight. We haven't heard too much about these teams in the offseason, really, other than St. John's, when you've got Slick Rick Pitino. He's always going to be talked about. But how do you take a look at this conference for the upcoming season? Because I think that they're going to be one of the more fascinating conferences in all of college basketball. And I do feel like there's going to be a clear divide between the haves and the have-nots as well, though.
Yeah, and the Big East is always just so entertaining just because they're only basketball schools in the passion and somewhat regionality minus Creighton, I guess. The Johnnies in UConn are definitely the 1-2 up top. UConn, I think, will be back to being closer to the old UConn rather than last year. I think that Hurley's got a good group coming in, talented freshmen, and I like what they did in the portal. And St. John's reloaded. They're going to hopefully be able to make a jump shot this year, unlike last year. So Creighton's replacing a ton. Marquette's replacing a ton. So those are 2 teams that have been in contention in the top 4 the Big East year in and year out, but we're going to see new look versions of them this year. But I do trust McDermott. I trust Shaka that they should be able to still contend for an NCAA tournament. And then teams that need to make a little bit of a jump. Ed Cooley at Georgetown. You also got Kevin Willard at Villanova. So some teams that have been a little bit down. Thad Matta at Butler. Can those teams make a jump here next year in the Big East?
Yep, I think that that is going to be a massive question for them, and it's going to be interesting to see if they are going to be able to make that jump. And when I take a look at this conference as well, I feel like there's just interesting teams, because you mentioned Thad Matta over at Butler. I think that they're one of the most fascinating teams in all of college basketball, because I take a look at them bringing in someone like a Yohan Traore. I think that he's rock solid. As we know, with Michael Ajayi, it didn't work out for him over at Gonzaga last year, but 2 years ago at Pepperdine, that was a guy that was a very rock-solid scorer, and I do think that that's one of those teams that has quite a bit of upside, and I think that they could be one of those teams that surprises this season.
I think so, too. I've been a little bit surprised. I feel like they've been close. They've lost a bunch of close games over the last couple of years, and I feel like I've been bullish on them the last couple of years, so a little hesitant to buy back in. But I do like Thad Matta, and I thought they finished the year strong, and I do like their portal pieces. I think that they could be in that large team, maybe a bubble team this year.
Yep, I'm right there with you, as we do have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And how do you take a look at some of those teams that we just mentioned it with Butler? They were close but no cigar the previous year, because I feel like it could go one of 2 ways. There is one school of thought thinking, oh, they're a year older, they're a year wiser. Now they're going to be able to have that experience, be able to get the job done. And then there's the other school of thought that it's just bad coaching in general, whereas like with Butler, I trust in Thad Matta. I can very much trust in him. Whereas with maybe a lesser school, maybe like a mid-major with an unproven coach, I would have a lot more question marks with them.
I do trust Thad Matta. We've seen him win at multiple levels. If you had those concerns with, let's say, Kevin Willard at Villanova, I mean, we saw them struggle at Maryland for years with close game losses, or even Richard Pitino. I know he did a great job at New Mexico, but I mean, he only won the league once, and he did have one of the most talented rosters last year, and Donovan Dent at the point guard position. So just some guys that I feel like have sometimes underachieved slightly, despite having really talented rosters. And even Shaka, I feel like sometimes as a big favorite, he comes up a little bit short.
Yep, Shaka Smart. It's always been very interesting with him, and I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because I think that it's one of the hardest things to do to evaluate a team like Marquette, who they don't use a portal at all. Like, I
I know.
recognize that in this day and age, there are some teams that are looking to be a little bit different, but I mean, the one guy that they brought in via the portal, and Tyler Kolek, we saw that panned out relatively well. Just really does blow my mind that they don't utilize the portal a little bit more, because I understand that there's wanting to be different, but at the same time too, it feels like they're almost doing themselves a bit of a disservice with the way that they operate.
I've been a little bit surprised as well. I know that they had success the first year just not using it because they had all that returning production. But over the last couple of years, I felt like they've been a piece or two behind in trying to replace guys like Kolek or Oso and Jones. I feel like they need a little bit more pop and a little bit more bang in the portal. But Shaka has been anti-portal from the beginning.
Yeah, he certainly has been. There's no question about that. That is indicated by the fact that he brought in as many people via the transfer portal as the two of us, and the two of us don't have a college basketball team. So that always makes things a lot of fun to be able to take a look at. And when it comes to taking a look at things, I always love to be able to get your thoughts here. Is there a team or two that over the last few weeks, because I know that you and Kobe Dan are doing such an amazing job of keeping up with everything out there in college basketball, that you've been evaluating and you're either feeling a little bit more bullish or a little bit more bearish about them just as the offseason has been going along?
That's a great question, Greg, because you're starting to see some tea leaves pop out of it. I think that VCU is going to be good once again down here under Phil Martelli in year number one. I think they're going to be talented, and we just know how good they are with this fan base and how good they are at home year in and year out. I think UMass is going to be just fine as well over there, transitioning over to the MAC. I think that they will be just fine transitioning from the A-10 to down a level. So I'm really interested to see the MAC this year. So those would be a couple teams that have popped the eye, and just hearing good things out there so far in the offseason.
Yeah, but I do think that that's going to be so interesting. And just with regards to the MAC in general, I think that that's going to be such an interesting conference, because I know the last time you joined me, we were talking a little bit about your guy and Frank Martin and him over at UMass, what we could expect out of them this season. I do feel like the MAC has fallen on a little bit of hard times, because I do feel like the divide between the haves and the have-nots has really made it difficult for the MAC, because you typically have those top 2 or 3 teams, and then there's just everyone else a country mile behind.
Yeah, it just feels like they get rated in the portal every year. And you just look at their rosters. But, I mean, they have really good coaches. Senderoff is a really good coach. Bowles at Ohio. Gross at Akron. They got multiple guys that have been in the NCAA tournament. So I think the MAC will just always be a solid league. Unfortunately, though, it'll always probably be just a one-bid league unless there's an outlier year.
Yep, I do think so as well. Something that I hope reverses course in the next few years. I would love to see a 2-bid MAC. I would love to see more of these mid-majors be able to get multiple teams in the NCAA tournament, but certainly in this day and age, it's a little bit more difficult. But something that is oh so easy is just talking college basketball with you, Ryan, because I know you do an amazing job just all 12 months of the year, keeping your head on a swivel, doing a great job being able to just take a look at all things college basketball. Love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yes, I appreciate it, Greg, as always. But check us out at the College Experience, college football going on now, and then we'll ramp up our college basketball previews and our coaches tour here come next month.
Yep, absolutely. And that coaches tour is very good. They always do a nice job every single year on that front. And I know that Kobe, along with Ryan, they do such an incredible job all 12 months out of the year of keeping up with this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. So a big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM. Name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.